every time I listen to Dr. Friedman, I learn something new. I bet that this episode with Susan Friedman as a guest will definitely be something new for you. We'll talk about labels and why it is good to unlabel behavior. Stay with us today and listen to the next episode. Unlabel me. What exactly is a label, and why we shouldn't use them?
Yeah, it's an important question for people to have a strong, confident answer to when they're working with behavior change. A label is a description of a class of behaviors given certain conditions. So we might label an animal dominant because when there is a competition for a resource, like a special spot on the couch or the food bowl or toy, they seem to win that resource over other animals, other dogs in the family. But the problem with the label is that it doesn't mean just one behavior, and it doesn't refer to a specific observable behavior. We need to know the specific behavior and the conditions in which it occurs in order to change behavior humanely and effectively. So rather than calling the dog a label like dominant, we would say that when the food bowl is put on the floor, that dog growls at another dog. So the conditions are not that the dog is growling all the time, but that it's growling under the specific condition of the food bowl on the floor. It's that level of specificity that we need to then change condition to change the animal's behavior.
Okay, so
Another small sort of facet of the idea of labeling is the word in psychology called construct, a hypothetical psychological construct. These are specific kinds of labels that infer some kind of internal process where the learner is doing. And so those are things like intelligence, jealousy, dominance, again. And just like our more usual labels, the problem with those constructs is they don't describe the thing we most need to observe, clear instances of behavior and the conditions in which they occur.
all right, so labeling is creating a, can we say it creates prejudice?
Well, it can create a negative prejudice. It can create a positive prejudice. For example, when I describe a dog as really sweet and friendly, that's describing a certain set of behaviors, like coming forward when called, gently taking food from our hands, remaining relaxed when stroked by a stranger. So we call that dog sweet. But without the specific behaviors under the conditions we want to see them, we are not able to teach.
Absolutely. So labels, can labels be dangerous? Because calling a dog sweet, or can it this in some certain conditions be dangerous for what we want to do, how we want to work with the animal?
Absolutely. We make assumptions by these labels and then act very intrusively as humans. We may have the expectation that a learner is sweet, but under the conditions of the food bowl on the floor, that dog will growl and would earn the label, dominant or territorial or food aggressive, all of these labels. So these labels are not something that animals are. It describes what they do under certain conditions. Yeah. So you're right. The point that having labels can be dangerous touches on the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies, which
Yeah.
is one of the problems with labels. When we have an expectation for how a learner will behave, then we subtly change without awareness our own behavior to get that
Mhm.
expectation met. So we may expect a dog labeled aggressive um, uh, will behave more aggressively because of the subtle changes in our own behavior due to the expectation.
Okay, so better than using labels is to describe the behavior and focus on the behavior the animal presents than use a construct.
Absolutely. And I stress also, it sort of sounds redundant, but it's so important
Yeah.
that not only are we focusing on observable, unambiguous behavioral descriptions, but also the conditions in which they occur. Because sometimes people focus solely on the behavior the animal is doing, as though, again, it's all inside the animal, and all they need to describe is what the animal does. But what we want people to understand very deeply is that behavior never occurs in a vacuum.
Okay.
It is always conditional. Behavior is always conditional. That is, it is always influenced and related to the specific environmental conditions in which the behavior occurs. And that insight allows us to teach well. That accounts for our perspective, which is we change behavior by changing conditions.
All right, because if we didn't focus on environment, on conditions and behavior, and instead focus on the label, we can't teach the label, right? We can't teach an animal to be calm, because this is very often what we hear, that I want my dog or my cat or horse, I want him to be calm when I'm around him or when other people are around him. We can't do that, right?
Right, we're not teaching a label, we're teaching the many behaviors that comprise the label. When we see all of those behaviors, we give it a name. So by calm, if we mean quiet mouth, relaxed muscles, hair, not erect, but laying down, tail, perhaps either in a relaxed position or held high and wagging, ears soft, eyes soft. These are the things we mean by calm. And when we use these labels before describing the behavior we mean and the conditions we want to see the behavior, very often what will happen is you say calm, but what you mean by that is different than what I mean. And so we are not even communicating well because we use these labels instead of describing behavior and conditions. And I just wanted to say that by conditions, I mean environment. So for me, the words are synonymous, the same. Conditions, environment, setting, yeah.
And by the environment, can we say also, because this is sometimes described in the books, environment inside, which means the organism, which can be a headache, how, in what conditions are we inside?
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful dot to connect. Skinner said that skin is no barrier.
Yeah.
There is an external environment and an internal environment, and both of those environments, or all of the environment, is influencing what we do and when.
So yes, for example, pain, right? If we experience pain, we may behave differently because it's a condition that changes our behavior.
That's right. Absolutely. Yep, well
Right.
understood.
So how does it relate to when we say that about feelings, and how does it relate to how behavior and constructs, labels relate to feelings, and the fact that sometimes we hear people say that I want my dog to feel confident, for example.
Right. Another great question we would need to ask, and this is as relevant in my work with children 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, as it is working with non-human learners. When we say we want a child to feel confident or a dog to feel confident, we have to ask, what are the behaviors, under what conditions should we be seeing to use that label?
Yeah.
So what does a confident learner do? And under what conditions do they do it? And that's what we're teaching. So we're not teaching confidence because, as you pointed out, it's an abstraction.
Yeah.
It's not tangible. It's a label, an adjective. When we talk about behaviors, we need to think about, what does confident look like? Or another way to say it, Teresa McKeon taught me this in the last few months, the wonderful originator of Tag Teach, to use the phrase, by that I mean. So I want my dog to be confident. By that I mean they should, and then we list out the behaviors we think we are thinking about when we use that overriding label.
All right. And also, it means that very often people say that people who focus on behavior and kind of blame those people, that they focus solely on the behavior and they forget about, we don't take into account feelings or how the animal feels in the moment. That behaviors are only focused on the behavior. And by what you said before, it's not true, right? Because of the conditions.
Yeah, that is right. In fact, it may be of interest to clarify that when Skinner labeled his line of interest as radical behaviorism, what he was referring to that was radical was the acknowledgement of the biology and the private events, thinking and feeling, of the organisms that we study and we help. So unfortunately, the word radical is often assumed to mean radically behavioristic, in observable only, denying thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
In fact, it was exactly the opposite that he was referring to, the acknowledgement of feelings and other private events, thinking, behavior. The problem with addressing feelings is that, first of all, it's a label, a construct that we have to ask, by that, what do you mean? Usually when people say feelings, they mean physiology. They mean the reactive, or reflexive, or autonomic aspects of our behaving system. Our rapid heart rate, our dry mouth, our churning stomach. If that's what they mean by feelings or emotions, the physiology, then we only need to make sure that we have measures. So we focus on the overt behaviors of feeling, like in a dog, hackles raised, lip licking, whale eye. Those are the physiological behaviors that we label uncomfortable feelings, in all the many words we have for uncomfortable. So what do we mean by feelings? If we mean thinking behavior, again, I can't access your thinking behavior. So this is not a problem between me and dogs or me and rhinoceroses. This is a problem between me and every other living organism on the planet. I can't read your thoughts either. People will often say, well, at least among humans we have language. But you could be telling me a falsehood that even you are mistakenly believing, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So I like to point out to people that the problem is not about not being able to read animals' thinking or private feelings. I can't read yours either. So we make inferences. Whenever we make inferences, we're on thinner ground, thinner ice, than when we can measure an observable behavior in conditions. So to summarize then, it's not a denial that animals are feeling, thinking organisms. It's only that, like the difference between you and I, there is this separation between our private events that I can't access yours. I can only access and report on mine. And I might not even be reporting accurately.
Okay.
So we do account for emotions and feelings. It's just that we do it very carefully because it's harder to verify than it is, you know, sitting and shaking.
Absolutely. And I just want to clarify the private events, the term, it's used to describe behaviors that are not visible for the observer, just for the person that behaves, right?
Right, for the organism that is behaving, they're the only ones who have access to the internal events that include feelings and thinking behavior, as well as the internal physiology, heart rate,
Mm-hmm.
churning stomach. Yeah.
We had
So
it.
for those behaviors, it is always an inference. And what do we use to infer? Behavior. Between humans, it's verbal behavior.
Yeah.
Between a human and a dog, we're watching the eyes, the ears, the tail, the
Mm-hmm.
reflexive hair raising on the back of the neck.
So we need to be careful observants. If we want to change behavior, we need to be aware exactly what we want. We need to define it.
That's right. Because measurement is the hallmark of scientific behavior, right?
Yeah.
Without measurement, there is no science. It is the repeatability of measurement. That is one of the things that makes science different than other ways of knowing. If we want to appeal or rely on a scientific way of knowing, replicable measurement is the heart of everything we do. So I don't deny anything I can't see. I just say I need the data to act on it.
Absolutely. And we can't, because if we don't use data, we are just making assumptions. And
That's
we
right.
cannot verify if our hypothesis is correct, actually.
Absolutely. And it will easily lead us down the wrong path, either with self-fulfilling prophecies, expectations about what animals should be doing that then influence their behavior, or it results in dangerous counter-aggression or, you know, overly intrusive solutions. Assumptions are something that we try very hard to minimize, and our sharpest tool to minimize assumptions is to rely on observable behavior and observable conditions.
Absolutely, because if we use labels, we very often use common knowledge instead of scientific knowledge, and we we are basing we base our work, what we do with an animal, on the construct instead of data.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And it leads us to either wrong solutions or harmful solutions, as you pointed out.
So if we want to have this happy animal, we just need to define happiness and define what a happy animal is to us. And it can absolutely be a different thing for me and different thing for you.
That's right. We need to define what a happy animal looks like, and we need to define what environmental arrangements produce that happiness. And then we set about arranging the environment.
Yeah. And how does it relate? Because behavior of a species, how does it relate to ethology and that how we perceive certain behaviors as natural for the animal?
Yeah, these are really great questions. I have to say that you are sort of stepping on stones in an order that really makes sense for me. Ethology is another science whose main perspective is the description of species generalities. What all dogs do in general compared to what all wolves do in general, or what all of what one subspecies of giraffe does compared to some other subspecies of giraffe. The point to remember is that, in general, ethologists study generalities. They're looking for average descriptions. So when I say the word average, right away that normal curve of statistics comes to mind. And their job is to collect enough measurements that they can describe a mean, that center of the bell-shaped normal curve. So that's of interest to us because it sort of sets the marks around which we can expect animals of a species to behave. But it's a very different point of view to come at it from a behavior analysis point of view, the science of behavior change and learning specialty. Because when we're talking about learning, we're not talking about what average animals do of that species, what boys do in general. We're talking about what the individual animal in front of us does. So we can bring to the table what poodles do in general, but once we have a particular poodle in front of us, then we need to let that become the background. And the foreground, the center of our inquiry, needs to be what this individual poodle does, which may or may not be well represented by the average description of poodles. So I call that a study of one. That when we use ethology, we're looking for generalities, and then once an individual animal is in front of us, we switch to the study of one, where each individual is really treated as though they are a species of their own norms that we have to discover through observation.
Because it can be very different from what the mean, the average group of the species does, right?
Exactly so. That normal curve is really an important thing to understand. It's describing the variability around the average. So I'm making that bell shape with my sign language. And from here to here is a lot of variability around that mean. So where does the individual you're helping fall on that number line? Statisticians have an axiom, a guideline that says there's more within a group variability than there is between group variability. So if this is the poodles and this is the pit bulls, their normal curves, there's more variability within each group than there is variability between these groups. There's a lot of overlap. And when we treat a given poodle with the expectation that it's going to act like the average poodle, but that individual happens to be more like a pit bull, we're going to miss those subtle or not so subtle differences because our filter is one of generalities when we need to take off that filter and then put on the filter of the study of the individual in front of us. I hope my hands are helping.
Yes.
I'm a sign language person. And so, okay, good.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
study of one should be how we approach each individual we are working with.
Right. And we can be loosely informed in the background based on those ethological generalities. Pigs don't fly.
Yeah.
So for me to spend time teaching a pig to fly rather than a parrot to fly is going to be folly.
Yeah.
But one pig may act very differently than another pig. And so when we come in to do our work from a learning point of view, the focus is on that individual as its own population.
Okay, yes. And can we use ethology to sort of set boundaries to what we can teach in terms of physiological abilities of the animal? So maybe use it as a guideline to what reinforcers we may use, what works.
Great point. Sure. That's a great example of how we may come into a training session with an individual prepared with reinforcers that we know are ethologically relevant to the natural history of that animal, but then need to be very fluid, very flexible, because that individual parrot who should like macadamia nuts because that's its historic food in Brazil happens to like peaches better, right?
Yeah.
So rather than saying this individual is flawed or dysfunctional in some way, we would just say this individual has different reinforcers than expected.
Okay, and it brings me to another question about that. Should we help ourselves with another science that is medical studies, and that we can use some medical knowledge also to work on the behavior?
Yeah, we need to know enough about the biology, the healthy physiology and structure of a species in order to identify when something may be wrong. So we need to know at least that much, and then we would call in the specialists in physiological, structural health, our veterinarians and our vet techs, our veterinary technicians. So it is another science. I call them the science sisters or science siblings. And the more sisters we can have at the table, the better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The better we and more responsibly we cover the health and welfare of the animal. But I do think that under health and welfare, the behavioral health is often less understood and less less focused on. So we're like the youngest sister in the sense that the little one is always fighting to be heard at the dinner table. I'm the youngest of three daughters. And I had this vision of me as a small child trying to get a word in edgewise and being eclipsed by the older sisters. I sometimes feel, although that's changed in the last 20 years and continues to change because of the good work of our community, we sometimes have to fight to be heard. Rather than to treat a problem medically, is to be given an opportunity to treat it behaviorally. That is, to investigate how the conditions support a problem behavior and then change conditions to change behavior.
So because behavior is itself interesting, right? It influences how the animal feels, what it does. It influences whole life. So we shouldn't just discard behavior as a something that happens inside
that's right.
The brain.
Right. Or inside the soul of the animal, you know, or the other ways that we describe the mysteries that come together to produce a happy life. So bringing all these different ways together is most helpful, but I always say that, you know, there's only so much you can study in a lifetime. So I study learning behavior, and when I need the help of the medical model or the ethological model, then I bring those sisters to the table. Yeah.
And there is another sister, which is neurobiology, right?
That's right.
That often is used as a better way to describe behavior, because it goes into the brain and tells us what inside the brain. But I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but when working with animals, we don't have access to the brain directly. We may only have some assumptions that something in the brain is happening and something is changing, but we can't measure it when I work with a dog in this particular moment.
That's right. That is well explained. And I would add to that, not only do we not observe it directly, we don't need to. Because the brain is not causing behavior. It's a correlate. It is correlated with behavior, just like the environment. So neither the brain nor the environment alone is sufficient. Together, they produce behavior. And to understand behavior only from the brain point of view is fine if that's your interest.
Mhm.
But if your interest is training and teaching, we don't need to understand how the brain works in order to change behavior from a learning point of view. We have to understand how the behavior, how the environment influences behavior, and then we assume the brain is jogging along with us, making the changes it needs to be a partner in producing the behavior that we see. So we are never working with brain information directly as behaviorists and behavior analysts, as teachers and trainers. Our best tool is environmental changes, and we assume the brain is working all the time, changing all the time. If I was a neuroscientist, I would drop in at the brain level, and I would explain behavior by what the brain does, not what the environment does. But it's also true if I were a heart specialist, I would explain behavior according to the circulatory point of view. And if I was a muscle person, I would explain how the muscle responds to the brain and the environment. So there are hundreds of sciences that relate to behavior. Not all of them are relevant for any particular behavior problem, yet all of them are influencing the behavior we see. Yeah.
But as a people working with animals and teaching them, we should be focused on behavior analysis, because about
I think so.
teaching processes, because this is what we do, right?
Right, this is what we do. So it's like asking a heart surgeon, why aren't you checking my toes? But heart surgeons don't deal with feet. Podiatrists, foot doctors deal with feet. So to ask a trainer or a teacher, why aren't you accounting for the animal's brain, is like asking a heart surgeon, why aren't you dealing with my feet? Right? It's just simply not where our specialty resides, and it's not relevant to what we do, although we acknowledge that you need healthy feet to be able to move your circulatory system. Everything is related, but not everything is related to solving a behavior problem all at the same time. I want to also mention that very little is actually known about how the brain correlates with behavior.
Oh, yeah.
In 2018, in the big picture of explanations, we have only a drop in the bucket of understanding how the brain actually works. And the common knowledge is often very superficial and often very incorrect.
Okay.
For example, to say that there is a reward center in the brain is incorrect. There are many reward centers, several reward centers in the brain. To say that there are single circuits for separate emotions like fear, panic, nurturing is incorrect, in that it appears a better explanation is the whole brain is working to produce those affects all the time. So I caution people about using the brain as an explanation for their work as trainers and teachers, because how much depth and time and study and years would you need to invest to know well how the brain works? And in 2018, the brain scientists themselves have enormous debates and far more questions than answers. So I worry that when people explain behavior from a training and teaching perspective with brain information, that most of the time it's insufficient information anyway. I think the best way to look at it is, as Susan Schneider says in her book, The Science of Consequences, the whole system is churning together all the time. The brain, the environment, the circulatory system, the auditory system, everything is working. Our genes are working all at the same time. And we get to specialize in a beautiful, magical, complex aspect, which is how behavior and the environment work to co-influence.
All right. And also, even if we had the knowledge, I think, about the brain, when we work in a training setting, we have no tools to change it. I mean, if I want my dog not to be afraid, by which I mean certain behavior, then I'm not changing anything inside his brain. I even wouldn't want to do it. I'm changing the environment and the conditions all around us to influence his emotion.
Right. And if I can just polish that explanation to be a little bit brighter or sharper, it would be to say, you are changing his brain, but that's not what you're doing directly.
Yes.
Right? Directly, you're changing the environment to change the dog's behavior. The brain, gene expression, and every other part of this complex organism is changing when you change overt behavior, but you're not, the way that you are influencing those other systems is indirectly.
Absolutely.
And unmeasurably.
Absolutely, which makes us focus, and we should focus as trainers, as specialists in animal training. We should be focused on the principles of learning, and we should dig deeper to understand how we can influence it directly.
Absolutely, but I think what makes it difficult for people who are new to this idea is what I call the cultural fog, a phrase that I got from an old economist from Sweden, Gunnar Myrdal. He was talking about the biological sciences when he said, there will always be errors in our understanding of biology due to the cultural fog. By that he means the filters that we bring to understanding what is in front of us. And I think that when you come from a culture that your whole life has held you accountable for something inside your body that explains, you know, a bad kid, a this or a bad genes, all these internal explanations, it would seem strange and hard to accept that in fact, the environment is moving your behavior all the time. And people hear that and they worry about their free will or their soul or their genes. All the explanations we have for behavior that miss one of the strongest influencers right in front of our eyes, and that is the way the environment influences our behavior. So we're asking people to make a very big paradigm shift. And I have compassion for the fact that it's very hard for them to do. It seems somehow less magical to explain behavior by the consequences past behavior has produced than it is to say, you know, the animal has bad genes.
Yeah, it was born this way.
Right.
Okay,
right.
And because when we say about another human or an animal that, oh, he's just he was born this way, he's not really confident, or I was born optimistic or pessimistic, and
Right.
I was born this way, it means that's who I am, and I don't think I can change it.
Exactly right. That's a big ask to say to people to give up those explanations that they've been raised with and are reflected all around them. But holding that position, I think, is missing is that you were born to change what you do based on past experience.
Yeah.
That is to learn. So we don't even see the phenomenal flexibility we are born with when we list the things that we're born with. On that list of genetic inborn characteristics is the most magical characteristic of all. That is to change what you do based on the experience of having done it, which is we call learning. We are born to learn. We are born to be changed by our environment. How our cultural fog missed that, so that when we list the things a dog is, we don't have on the top of that list is a flexible learner, is I think why we've been in the trouble we've been. We've been less effective in protecting the health and welfare of animals because learning isn't on top of the list. Brain function and genetics are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a
And
funny thing. It's a cultural fog.
yeah, when we talk about animals, we call them labels, right? We call them motivated, drive, or bored, vicious, and this allows us also to blame the animal and to say that, okay, he's that way, and my work, no matter what I do, won't be really effective. So I don't really need to be bothered by the work or by all the learning science because I can't change what he is.
Right. And we can have compassion for how hard it is to say to people, take responsibility instead. Right?
Yes, this is
So if your
responsibility.
dog isn't or your child isn't doing what you want in a given environment,
Mhm.
if what they're doing is not successful, it requires a willingness to take responsibility for the other animal's behavior, responsibility for one another. You know, I just sent out a big letter for my online class,
Mhm.
and it's been amazing to me how many people did not follow the directions that I and my assistants reviewed and believed to be very clear.
Mhm.
So we can blame the students for not focusing on the directions, not giving it the time required, being lazy, being stubborn, all of the labels. Or we can say, if our students don't understand our written instructions, then we did not write them properly, and we need to go back and change what we do. So to see another animal's behavior as feedback to you, the owner, the trainer, the caregiver, as feedback to you about what is adequate and what is inadequate in the environment we provide is the ultimate power to help.
Okay.
Every time we refuse responsibility, we are also abdicating, giving away our ability to help. Every time I say your behavior is inside you, I can't help. But when I say your behavior is correlated with, is reflecting the adequacies and inadequacies of the environment to support the target behavior, the behavior I want to see, then I can help because I can change the environment.
All right. And so we can say that unlabel me is can we say it's a direction we should follow to take the responsibility to be able to help animals and people.
That's right. And the responsibility specifically we're talking about is the responsibility to identify how the current environment, the antecedents, the things that happen before the behavior, and the consequences, the things that follow behavior, how the environment that brackets or wraps behavior is influencing behavior, and then changing it to help the animal be able to behave in the way that will be more successful. By responsibility, it means identifying how the behavior is related to the environment we provide, and then how to change the environment humanely and effectively to result in the desired behavior.
You said humanely, and it brings another aspect, which is ethics, right, to the table.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
changing behavior is not just using every tool we have. It's also really strongly correlated to ethics, and that it's not what we can do rather than what we should do, right?
Absolutely. And again, just really nicely said. I mean, the word ethics and the field ethics is a very deep hole of expertise, and I don't hold that expertise. But I do have ethicists as friends, Bernie Rowland and others, who I can turn to and read their work, and I can ask questions to. But you know that I put my toe in the water, so to speak, by borrowing one ethical standard from special education and moving it into my work with animals, and that is the procedures that we use. We can follow an ethical guideline, which is the least intrusive, effective procedure. And I think we can at least, talk about that.
Yeah.
As you said, given many procedures that would work, what is our ethical responsibility to the one we choose? Effectiveness is not enough. We need to also consider which is the one that leaves the animal with the most control. And that's what we mean by the least intrusive procedure. It's the one that is effective and gives the animal control over their own outcomes. Because control over your own outcomes is why behavior evolved. It's what behavior has evolved to do. Control the outcomes in your environment.
Okay, wow, this is something I think bringing this all together that gives really great perspective on how we can move forward with science of behavior in terms of learning, working and living with animals. That if we are open to learning the science and understanding it, we can be really great friend. I don't want to say trainers, but also trainers, but also partners in life for the animal.
Absolutely. Partners, caregivers, advocates, protectors of not only the animals we work with, but of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to sum up our conversation, people who want to learn more about Unlabel Me and labels can go to your website, behaviorworks.com. And there are many resources and many articles and the stickers I love about Unlabel Me in various languages. They can use it, right? They can read it, they can.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning it. It would be my great pleasure for people to go to behaviorworks.org and download anything on that website. And if you go through it carefully one day, get a big cup of coffee, sit down and just click through, you'll find that there's articles with 13 or 14 different translations. There are graphics. Unlabel Me is one. The Trust Account is one. The ABC graphic is one. Everything on that website is available for people to download and to use and disseminate in any way that will help spread this information. Yep.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that you took time and spent this, did this conversation with me. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. And I have to say that you did a beautiful job interviewing. You were my environment influencing my responding behavior, and you arranged it really well. You came so prepared, and your questions really helped me unfold the things that are important to me. Thanks very much.
For the next episode, we will travel to Sweden to meet with Eva Bertilsson and talk about seamless sessions.